welcome to this episode of the Cyber Leadership Series out of the Digital Transformation Lab, which is part of Cork University Business School in University College Cork here in Ireland. We're absolutely fantastic today to, I suppose, introduce JC Gaillard. And it's also, I suppose, really the first author that we've had that really has focused exclusively on the concept of cybersecurity. So we're really excited by that, and also excited to be sharing some of JC's expertise in this area. So I'm going to just ask JC if you want to quickly introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. First of all, very happy to be with you guys. And I'm JC Gaillard, as you said. I'm the founder and CEO of Corix Partners. And Corix Partners is a boutique management consulting business I established in London about 15 years ago. I'm French and British. I've been living and working in the UK for the best part of the last 35 years. My first career, if you want, the first part of my career is in the financial sector and in tech. At Paribas, first of all, until it became BNP Paribas, and then at Rabobank, where I was the chief security officer for about 10 years for the international division. And I set up what eventually became Corix Partners as part of my exit from Rabobank. And that's it, really. Corix Partners, as I said, is a boutique management consulting business. We work mostly with large firms around cybersecurity strategy, organization, governance, operating models. Our typical client is an incoming CIO who's taking up a new job, looking around, figuring out that there are problems around cybersecurity and needing help around what to do about it. And that's essentially what we do. We help those organizations get a sense of what needs to be done and where the priorities need to be around cyber. And that's it, really. And that's the background in which all my work is rooted in terms of publishing work, and the book we're going to be talking about, which is effectively a sort of management summary of an earlier book. And that's it from me. Once again, delighted to be with you guys, and I hope we can have an interesting and fruitful conversation.
Oh, JC, I know we will. You're a prolific writer as well, so you have articles in everywhere from Forbes to all over the internet, and you're recognized as one of the top people in cybersecurity. So we're absolutely delighted to have you here. I have read your book. I've read your previous book as well, and I find your insights terrific. I suppose what would be interesting to start with, the genesis behind this book, because the title is very interesting: the cybersecurity spiral of failure. So maybe what was the genesis behind your thinking for that?
Well, this is essentially the starting point of my entire writing process, not so much the thinking process, but the writing process. When I became a consultant, effectively, about 15 years ago, at the start of the Corix venture, I was shocked to see the state of what I was finding in some of my clients' organizations. Fundamentally, the two organizations I had worked with before, Paribas and then Rabobank, I realized they were quite well managed and quite well run. But God, when I started consulting and when I started going to see other organizations, I realized that there is a tremendous amount of problems out there, even with large organizations that have a very well-established brand, a very well-established name, organizations that might have been sending people to security conferences for the best part of the last 20 years. One day you get in there, you look under the carpet, and you realize the size of the problems they have. So I was absolutely shocked by that type of situation. And that security didn't appear overnight. It didn't appear with the COVID pandemic. It didn't appear with the global financial crisis. The best practices have been in existence for the best part of the last 20 to 25 years. ISO 27001 in itself is the international version of a British standard, BS 7799, which itself was drafted by BT in the mid-90s. Okay, so that's the perspective we need to keep as well. On all this. So how can it be that large organizations that would have had some form of information security organization in place for the best part of the last 20 years, organizations that would have been spending millions, if not tens of millions, with large consultancies, with tech vendors, etc. How can it be that those organizations could be waking up today with maturity levels that are a problem and with essentially vulnerabilities that shouldn't be present? Okay, so that's the starting point of my reflection. And if you never look back, if you never ask yourself, where are the roadblocks that have prevented progress in the past, you will never change, you will never move forward. And that's essentially the topic I'm exploring in the book, and the dynamics of that, what I've been calling the spiral of failure. How can organizations be stuck in that sort of dynamic and not moving forwards with cybersecurity in spite of tens of millions, hundreds, God knows how many billions collectively over the past 20 years.
JC, it's fair to say, I mean, it's a bit like digital transformation. It ends up being a digital initiative. And I think what you're saying is in cyber, a lot of times it just ends up being another digital initiative as opposed to actually trying to figure out what the organization needs to do and how it needs to transform.
Yes, with cyber, it's complicated by the fact that for the first decade of the century, effectively, information security was just seen by top execs as a sort of balancing act between compliance, regulatory compliance, costs, and some sort of perception of risk appetite. Okay? And that's essentially where the drivers have been for the best part of the century. Okay? I know it because that's exactly the decade I navigated as a CISO. Okay, that's exactly what it was. The only drivers were regulatory drivers, and everything was cost constrained. And when the business didn't want to do anything, they would just turn around and say, "Oh well, we accept the risk." All that, of course, without any kind of data-driven or concept behind it. Yeah. So that's the background, if you want, of the spiral of failure, short-termism. The always looking for alleged quick wins, always taking a sort of minimalist approach to put a tick in a box on a compliance checklist somewhere. That's the background in which the spiral of failure is rooted. Because after 10 years or more of that type of attitude, what you end up with is a monumental pile of junk, effectively. Every time you had a problem to fix, every time you had an audit point to close, every time you had a regulatory inspection coming, it was about bringing in some consultants or buying some tech tools. 20 years later, most large organizations are operating around 10, 20 different tools now. And this is also at the heart of why they can't operate, because they have accumulated a degree of technical debt and a degree of technical complexity around cybersecurity that denies them any kind of agility around the topic. Okay? So that's I don't know if I've answered your question now, Tony. I can talk a lot about this, and if you let me go off a tangent, I could go on for a while. So you need to stop me and rein me in if you want. Have I answered your point?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, indeed. I know Paddy's trying to get in there.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting because I could sense in the book, JC, a tension, a tension between, I suppose, the upper levels, the strategic view, and the lower levels, and an operational view. And I was really intrigued by how you were trying to, I suppose, interplay between those, because I think you were suggesting maybe, that overly strategic view has failed in the past. Boards, executives haven't really come on board. But I think also you're suggesting maybe the bottom-up approach and the technical debt and all those other issues also have not been successful. Any comments on that?
The bottom-up approach has not worked. Okay, that's absolutely clear. For the first decade of the century, the senior execs were not hearing anything beyond compliance around cybersecurity. And to a large extent, compliance, risk management, depending on their level of maturity around those aspects, that's the only message that they were prepared to hear. Okay? Many CISOs, many technologists try to push bottom up some discussions around return on investment and trying to justify spending on cybersecurity and other topics by trying to figure out some form of business return. It never worked. It never worked. Those people were just not interested in listening to that. Nothing was functioning beyond the compliance and the risk levers. Okay? And now when the financial crisis came, and then around the turn of the first decade of the century, and of course with the monumental shift that followed with the cloud, with the emergence of mature cloud services, with the emergence of a completely new concept of mobility, with the widespread availability of more and more powerful, smaller and smaller mobile devices, and so on. You know, we tend to see our smartphone as they are today, but they've not always been around. You know, we need to keep that in mind as well. The emergence of that technological layer, you know, effectively at the start of the second decade of the century, has completely changed the dynamics around cyber, in the sense that the focus has been on digital transformation, and the business has realized gradually that whether you want it or not, cyber attacks are unrelenting, that they're having a bigger and bigger impact every time, and that they are gradually becoming a matter of when not if. And this is the when not if paradigm, to me, is really at the heart of what we should be talking about here, because that's essentially what dominates, I think, the feeling at top level, whether it's at board level or at leadership team level. This is very much the feeling that dominates these days. That's what I'm hearing more and more. And it does create dynamics that are now totally different to the dynamics we were having at the beginning of the century. As I said, the first decade, it's all about risk, it's about compliance, it's all about ticking boxes, it's all about doing the minimum you need to do to get the auditors and the regulators away. Today, the situation is different. You know, when you accept that when not if is the dominant concept around cybersecurity, you enter a different realm. Because when not if means it's going to happen. Okay, so you get out of the risk mindset. The risk is about things that may or may not happen ultimately. Okay, you can mitigate it, you can transfer it, etc. When not if means it's going to happen. So you shift the mindset from the focus on something that may or may not happen to something that is going to happen to you. And all of a sudden, it's no longer just about putting ticks in boxes. It's also about getting things done, because the top execs, the board members, the independent directors, but also the leadership team, you know, have the duty to shareholders, to stakeholders, to the staff, to the employees, to the customers, to keep the business going at the end of the day. And if you accept that cyber attacks can take your business down and they can happen to you, then what matters is obviously protection. And that means execution in my mind. You know, so the language the language has shifted, if you want, between the top execs and the rest of the organizations. The top execs are now expecting, in my opinion, to get things done. They want the business protected. They want the IT and security community to deliver. That's what they're expecting. You know, I had many discussions with CIOs behind closed doors, eye to eye, where they've told me, I could put any money I want on my budget on cyber. I could put any number in my budget. I know it won't be cut. They'll cut me elsewhere. They won't cut me on that. Okay, but they are added, most of them. But then I need to deliver. Okay, and that's the key shift in mindset, if you want. Yes, we're shifting towards an execution decade, if you want, as opposed to the two previous decades. I mean, the first decade of the century was very much what I've been calling a risk and compliance decade. The second decade of the century for me was a realization decade. That's the decade during which businesses realized that, God, this is real, this is going to happen to us one day. And now we're entering the third decade of the century. We're reaching the middle of it. And I think it has to be an execution decade, the decade where really the businesses have now to focus on getting things done. Now, I need to say a few words. I'm stopping here, sorry, because I understand I'm talking a lot. Guys, over to you.
Yeah, no, I'm curious, because in the book you talk about this. You know, a lot of this actually is about mindset change. It's about mindset change in the boardroom and with the exec team, that this is not an IT issue over there somewhere. And so they need to understand, actually, this is about managing the business, and managing the business includes cyber. But equally, you talk about the mindset change that's required at the CISO level, because you talk about the revolving door. So CISOs keep changing, and someone new comes in and they say, well, I better fix a problem to show that I'm on top of this. So they get another new piece of technology and just compound the whole situation. So how do we get to a situation where the maturity of mindset, because you talked about cyber maturity, but the maturity of mindset at a board, executive, and CISO level, where people start to talk about, let's talk about this business and where we're bringing this business and how we need to manage the business, including cyber. How do we get there?
I think there is a need to rethink organizations, to be honest, in many large organizations, at least where there is enough margin of maneuver to build a different type of organization around cyber and business protection. I think we're reaching that point. Whether we like it or not, the CISO construction hasn't really worked, I would say. Okay, it's been from my perspective, it's never been conceived positively with the view of creating or protecting the business, etc., of driving cyber maturity. The CISO position historically has emerged out of those risk and compliance considerations I was talking about. And you know, many CISOs have been stuck in a quest of legitimacy towards their business, just by construction almost. Most of them are technologists by background. Most of them have taken throughout their career a technology-driven approach to cybersecurity, and that's the model they're replicating from one job to the next. You can't blame them. That's just their background. That's what they do. Okay, they see it that way. So the current generation of CISO, the current generation of people carrying the CISO tag, I think, are part of that, whether they like it or not. Most of them can organize differently about the organization and injecting into it some form of business talent. Okay, and that's what I've been thinking for a while. We will only, if we carry on hiring technologists in those jobs, nothing will never change. We need to start looking for different profiles to inject business sense effectively into the whole thing. And if you try to do it top down, so if you try to build it up from the leadership team, probably you know, backed by somebody at board level, you need to figure out how you're going to build a portfolio of work that will be sufficiently meaningful to attract the right caliber of talent. And you need to start looking towards amalgamating cybersecurity, probably privacy, probably business continuity, probably the overall cyber resilience concept, or maybe the overall business resilience concept. In some organizations, it may make sense to amalgamate into it operational resilience as well, depending on the nature of the business, the industry sector, and so on. When you start amalgamating all those aspects into one portfolio, then you start building up a role that should be substantial enough to attract business people and to be a relevant career step for them. Not necessarily an end of career step. I don't really like that. I can see why in many organizations it could be a lovely end of career job for many people, but I think it should also be it can also be a very significant mid-career steps, because frankly those problems are very, very complex. Okay? And if you can prove yourself as a top exec at sorting this out, if you can prove yourself at picking up a problem of that operational complexity, making it work across a large enterprise, and embedded into the way the company works, if you can deliver that, it can be a career accelerator as well. I don't think those jobs are dead ends, if you want. They have been over the years for many people, no doubt. But I think those jobs, if you build them up, you can turn them into a very attractive career, mid-career step for ambitious execs. But you need that amount of management experience, that amount of depth, that amount of personal gravitas to make it happen. And then the CISO could remain at technical level, looking after the technical aspects of cyber, which are there. We keep saying it's not just an IT problem. Of course, it is not just an IT problem. It is a business problem fundamentally, but it has an IT dimension, and we cannot also ignore it completely. But that's a little bit the way I would answer your question, Tony. The organizations have to evolve, I think, at some stage, at least in large firms.
Yeah, and I suppose the sort of reality, JC, is still the maturity levels are incredibly low. And I suppose there's no obvious signs that that's changing other than the fear the fear factor of something going wrong. And I think it's really interesting, though, the way you've sort of differentiated between the early decades of this century, though. And you spoke there about the second decade, though, maybe 2010 to 20, really about, trying to explain this is going to happen. It's not an if, it's a when. But that's, for me, reminds me of why we buy insurance. We buy insurance to protect us against something that's very likely or that will happen. And I still think that's the way organizations view cybersecurity, by hiring maybe CISO, creating a structure. It's an insurance policy. But the problem is when you see something as an insurance policy, all you really see is the cost of it. And you only see the value of it if something and when something goes wrong. And I think that's a very hard area to play. And I'm not sure the cybersecurity profession has really, really cracked that nut in terms of persuading organizations at the top level of the importance of maybe a more proactive approach to cybersecurity.
No, I don't think they have, to be honest. I want to go back to something you said at the start here, which is something I was going to say earlier, but then I got carried away, I suspect. Yes, I've mentioned the 3 decades of the century, but what I wanted to add is that this is actually coming out of a piece of research we did in 2019 with the Security Transformation Research Foundation, which is a sort of think tank affiliated to Corex Partners. And we took the last 17 global information security surveys from EY. So every Big Four firm produces every year some form of global survey on cyber. EY have been doing it since 1998, which is interesting in itself. And so we went back to 2002, I think, and we collated all those and we scraped the content, the words, not the graphics, not the numbers, not the data in that way, but just the words, just the language. And we ran a semantic analysis of that content. And we looked at keyword frequencies. Okay? And that's exactly where what I've told you earlier comes from. What I didn't know what I was going to find. It's an exercise I had wanted to do for a long time. And I had a very nice guy, a very nice student working with me who was very much a data nerd. And we had a chat. He said, I know how to do this. So we did it. Okay. But anyway, all in all, the results were fascinating because we could see very clearly those 2 decades emerging. During the first decade, the language that dominates is risk and compliance related language. When you turn into the second decade, 2010, 2011, 2012, you can see the volume dropping. You can see the volume dropping for risk and compliance language, and you can see the language related to crisis incidents and all that emerging. And this is absolutely fascinating to see it. And it's exactly where the bulk of what I've been saying before comes from in terms of those various decades. The research is available on securitytransformation.com, and it's also available in the appendix of my first book. My first book is called the Cybersecurity Leadership Handbook, and I'm actually going to release a second edition probably in the coming few months if everything goes well. And the cybersecurity spiral failure is effectively a sort of management summary of the handbook, if you want.
Yeah, JC, one of the things I've heard you say this at events as well, because we've spent the last decade firefighting. One of the arguments you're making is actually we don't have the mental wherewithal to shift gears and become transformational. We're just firefighters. So how do we ever stop being just firefighters and move this on? Because if that's ingrained in how we think about the business, how do you change?
That's going back to what we were saying before, Tony. I think the current generation, there is a generation of people working in cyber, CISOs and the like, who have that built in. Okay, there is little you can do about it. That's the way they see their business. That's the way they see the value they bring to their business. There is very little you can do about it. There is very little you can do about it. You need to shift the organization to inject a different mindset. I don't think it is possible to expect the current generation of people to change. On top of that, to be honest, many of them can't. I remember a discussion with a CISO a number of years ago. You know, there is a series in the book, certainly in the handbook, not in the failure, I think, but in the handbook there is a series about the first 100 days of the new CISO. And I remember very well. I was interviewing CISOs for that, and one of them told me, "Well, my first 100 days ended on day 3." Essentially because you know, he walked into a situation where he couldn't really walk away from the reality of the fact that there were fires burning everywhere, and that you know, your management expects you to deal with that, and that's it. The new CISO always has to balance that the tactical emergency versus the strategic view. But in some instances, it's simply impossible. In some instances, the tactical reality, the tactical problems are so strong, so overwhelming, and the culture of the place is so short-termist that you have no choice, okay, but to follow that path of least resistance, and just and you never get out of it. That's the real problem. You never get out of it. The idea that you're going to deal with the quick wins first, and then you will build up a plan. In practice, very often it just never happens. You get sucked into it, and next thing you know, a number of years have passed, and the next job is lining up for CISOs. Because that's another issue to bear in mind. CISOs don't stay a very long time, partly because they struggle, partly because they are headhunted, but the short tenure of the CISO is also a very, very important factor here. Because to be honest, in 2 to 3 years, you don't do anything. You don't achieve anything transformational. You know, to really put in place some form of transformative program of work, you need to stay at least for, I would say, 5 to 6 years, in my opinion. You need first of all to get things going. You need to get the buy-in from the stakeholders. You need to stay for a number of budgetary cycles so that you can demonstrate to your management that you can deliver on the money they're giving you. And then you need to figure out where what you have built has taken you, and where you're going to do what you're going to do next. Effectively, it's a 2 cycles, a cycle and a half to 2 cycles. You need to think about in terms of timeframes to really build something lasting. That's something I'm very proud of at Rabobank. I have to blow my own trumpet every now and then as well. You know, at Rabobank I spent close to 8 to 9 years in the chief security officer position. But I'm very, very proud when I talk to some of the guys who are still there, and I left in 2009. And I'm still very, very proud. So 15 years later, when I talk to the guys who are still there, where they're still telling me that they're still using some of the stuff I put in place, and that I'm extremely, extremely proud of, to be honest. And that's just that's about persistence. That's about staying the course. That's about not losing sight of the long term, even if you have some form of short-term emergencies to deal with. And that's about pushing in the right direction, in the same direction, and bringing people with you. Because that's the essence of leadership. I don't want to go too far and be too philosophical about it. But fundamentally, you're a leader when people follow. And that's the essence of it. And people follow you when there is something in it for them. And that's what I've always kept in mind in terms of about leadership. There's nothing fancy about leadership. It's about inspiring people and people following you because they feel inspired, and there is something in it for them, you know, to with you.
And sorry, JC. So like it's fantastic to hear, you know, that positive experience you've had, you know, and the impact that your time there has had. But I still don't think this discipline has cracked the board level, the strategic level, you know, and it reminds me of many conversations I've been involved in, but more in relation to the CIO and how it has evolved over the last few decades, you know, and some would refer to it as for a long time being a very defensive role, keeping the lights on. Then others have been exhorting people in that role to become more offensive, to become more strategic. And I think that's maybe possible in that role because you can sell maybe the value of digital transformation, etc. But I think it's an incredibly difficult thing to do for CISOs. What are you selling that's really strategic? Because even the language you use for me is quite defensive, though, to be a safe pair of hands to deliver. And it seems to be a real delivery role, not a strategic role. And I'm not sure that. Yeah,
I see it like you see it. I've got my doubts as well around the strategic approach at top level. I've got my doubts. Well, I don't think this penny has dropped yet. I think it is seen as part of something that needs to be done. Again, it's taking us back to the when not if paradigm. Okay, it's just what it is. You know, there are lots of things that can go wrong in large organizations. Cyber is one of them. You know, top execs want the business protected. Yes, this is not in itself a strategic vision. I would be wrong in telling you that I think that, you know, this concept permeates throughout the strategic vision of the top guys. I don't think it does. At least not well. It might. Of course, every organization is different, and it's easy to we can probably pick up exceptions here and then. But overall, I tend to agree with you. I don't think this has permeated throughout the strategic makeup of the mindset of the top guys.
I mean, look, we've had a lot of high-profile cyber attacks in recent months. You know, hospitals, you name it, big attacks, and there's increasing focus coming from regulators and people who are holding boards to account. So the boards can't avoid this. I mean, it's coming at them, and they're going to have to step up to the plate, right? But I think one of the challenges, and you talk about it in the book, is but it only comes on the agenda on occasion, right? Whereas I think you're saying that it should be there all the time. It should be how they think about the business. Notwithstanding the pressure from regulators, why is it taking boards so long to get their arms around this?
Because there is just too much going on. There is always something happening somewhere. There's always a problem. There is always, I mean, look at the last few years, frankly. I mean, you know, the COVID pandemic, the aftermath of it, the global supply chain problems, etc. I mean, this is you can easily understand the sort of agenda those guys are having. Some organizations have been terribly affected by the COVID pandemic. You know, the hospitality industry, the airlines. Some have been booming, logistics, packaging, and so on. But fundamentally, those problems are just at board level. There is the sense that still the problem is technical in essence, and therefore you need technical skills. So at board level, the dominant story seems to be, oh, we just don't have the skills, we don't understand it, and that's the problem. And that's wrong to me. It's the wrong approach, if you want, from my perspective. Because first of all, it's not just a technology problem, and it's never been. Okay, so that's something somebody across the boardroom table should be able to say. There is no right or wrong here. There should be a degree of ownership at board level around cyber problems, business protection problems at large, possibly. There should be a degree of ownership at board level. However, this ownership can be embodied in a number of ways. I don't think it has to be embodied in technical terms. It can perfectly be embodied in business terms, but it needs to be embodied. There needs to be somebody at board level visibly holding the cybersecurity hat, or at least the business protection hat. Somebody visibly responsible, accountable for handling those issues. And holding the leadership team accountable, of course, for delivering on it. Because let's not forget that there are also those governance issues to bear in mind. You know, the board is a particular governance body. The leadership team is effectively running the business. So I'm just I think it needs to happen. We need to figure out ways of injecting that kind of mindset at board level. For me, it's the starting point. I'm not totally against ideas where regulators could impose that kind of role at board level. I'm not totally against it. I think there are many ways in large organizations where it could be done. You know, independent directors, directors and so on. The board is in large firms, boards have a degree of complexity that should allow them to do that. I think the regulators are involving themselves ultimately because they don't think things are done right. That's just the way it is. Okay,
JC, just a follow-up question though. If that's the board, then you go down to the leadership level. Is this seen as something that the leadership collectively owns, or is that seen, oh, that's that person over there, that's them?
I don't like collective ownership personally on those matters. Collective ownership on transversal matters such as cybersecurity, for me, it could be devastating. Let's go back to a few things. Let's take this opportunity to say a few things about large organizations. Okay? They are political, they are territorial, personalities matter. Some people get on, some people don't get on. Let's get that out of the way. This is real life. We're talking about people, real people doing real jobs. Okay, and all those aspects are part and parcel of what we're talking about here. Okay, let's not ignore those, because I think we would be making a big mistake. So collective ownership of a complex, transversal, cross-silo matter in an organization that is political, that is territorial, that is prone to personal rivalries, do you really want to give it a try? Hold on, okay? So we have to be a little bit realistic here. Personally, I think it depends a lot on the culture of the firm, the culture of the leadership team, and so on. But I would be more comfortable with clear ownership, frankly, with clear ownership across the leadership team. Okay, but that's becoming a heavy parcel to carry, because, as you've pointed out, the regulators are now looking towards personal liability for top execs. And okay, in Europe, it could be still relatively manageable. In the US, it simply means you go to jail. Okay, so that's an interesting development, I think, from a career perspective, and it will certainly, it is certainly creating a certain context around the discussion we're having. We cannot ignore it. The regulators are stepping in. Litigations have happened. Some CISOs have been taken to court and so on. Those things do happen. Okay? They are here. They're not science fiction. So it does create certain dynamics around the type of organizational concepts we're talking about. But I still think this spiral of failure will be broken top down, not bottom up. Bottom up, we've been trying for 20 years. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're going to see it too soon, unless it's a defensive step that something has happened and companies respond to it. Again, just because cybersecurity is a really important matter doesn't mean you need someone at the board that's a chief information security officer. It could be that the cybersecurity function reports to an existing officer, and this same conversation has been going on a lot in the sort of the CIO space. Should you have a CIO on the board, or should the let's say the IT function report to someone else that's on the board, i.e. traditionally it was the CFO, So I'm not sure really the cybersecurity discipline, and I don't want to be too hard on the cybersecurity discipline, because I think you also say yourself that you're not sure the people within that discipline are even really ready for change. But I'm not sure that the discipline really is ready, or have maybe demanded a space and deserve the space at the board level. And I'm saying that to be maybe provocative, JC. I just don't see it,
I don't see it happening soon, like you said. The thing to bear in mind with cybersecurity, and it is inherently a cross-functional topic. Okay, you cannot just narrow it down to its technical content. We've said that, but you've got to understand the extent of what we're talking about here. To be successful around identity and access management, for example, you need to involve your business, you need to involve HR, you need to involve IT, you need to involve your cloud providers, and so on and so forth. And you need to be able to get those various stakeholders to work together. And that's just an example, but many cybersecurity disciplines are architected across the various corporate silos. And that's the real difficulty of it, to be honest. The large organizations, they work in silos. That's just the way it is. Okay, and it's very difficult to get them to break out of that habit, and it's very difficult to get true cross-functional practices to operate in an effective and efficient manner. That's the real problem around cyber. So a reporting line at board level will help, as long as the board level member is willing and capable to bridge that gap. Because I think you're not going to bridge that gap anywhere below. Below, you're going to get, again, bogged down in the various silos. So reporting line to the top, yes, as long as the top guy is able and willing to act as that bridge across the silos, and as long as he has the personal gravitas, the authority, the management experience to make it happen. And as long, of course, as well as having exactly the same commonality of views as the guys below delivering on cyber. So that's the. It starts to we start to build up a pretty heavy list of requirements here when you think about how do you make it happen. But I do think that if you can make it happen, if you have those people, then by all means you'll be successful. That's not far to the situation I had when I was at Rabobank, I must say. That's not far. That's not far, because I was reporting the COO, and he was a board member, and he was that sort of guy. And you know, I think if you have those kind of assets in your organizations, then you can make it work. But
have organizations actually stopped to think about what they're looking for here? Because, you know, depending on where, I mean, I think there was a report out from the European Union recently saying we need 3 million more people in cybersecurity. And they talked about other parts of the world where there's even bigger gaps. So if organizations are becoming increasingly digital, which they are, increasingly, you know, remote working, which you've already talked about, and we'll get to AI in a while, have organizations stopped to think about, well, actually, what type of cyber people do we need in the future? And how do we build that role and make it attractive? Because isn't that part of the problem?
The skills gap in cybersecurity is a problem. Okay, let's be clear. It's not an invention. It's real, and it's quite deep. Now, when you say we're missing 3 million people in cyber, the real question is to do what? Okay.
Exactly.
Where are those skills missing? Why? How do we end up with those numbers? And where are those skills missing? What are those people meant to be doing? If we could find them, if they could appear out of nowhere, where would we put them? Okay, and that's the real issue. Now, for me, it's a problem that is rooted in everything we've been talking about, in particular at the start of the discussion. Many large organizations are struggling with highly inefficient security operation processes. Why? Because, as we said before, for 10, 15, 20 years, they've been buying a new tool every time something happens. So now they have security operations organized, structured around 10, 20 different tools. They have security operation centers where analysts have to go to 3, 4, 5 different tools to collect data when they're investigating an incident. They have, you know, other analysts sitting next to the first ones who have to go to 5, 6, 7 different tools to build a report that's going to go on the audit and compliance committee. All that ends up in Excel, right? Let's be clear. All that ends up in Excel, and then from there they do the lovely graphs and they sort everything they need to sort, and they put it in the lovely reports they need to produce. I'm sarcastic a little bit, but frankly, I've seen it happen. And so why do we think we need more people? Do we need more people to scale up those inefficient processes? In some cases, that's very simply the case. In some cases, the only thing CISOs know how to do is to scale up. Okay, so they've got 10 analysts doing all those silly things. Well, they need 20. So fine, bring 10 more. Okay, this is not the right way to approach the problem, to be honest. In my view, there is also another way, which consists of looking at, where the inefficiencies are and what you can do to make your processes more efficient. But anyway, going back to skills gap, where are the skills missing? Many of the skills we think are missing are related to those inefficiencies, to the inefficiencies of the security operational processes we've been building organically over the years. Okay, they're not right. They're just organic. We've been building them up as we were going along, and now we're looking to scale them up, and we need more and more people until somebody goes back and look at the architecture of those processes and why they are the way they are, and until somebody starts to declutter the cybersecurity toolkit landscape, nothing will change. Okay? It's exactly the same problem we were talking about at the start of this discussion. If nobody never looks back at where the problems are that have created the situation we're in, nothing will never change. And that's a little bit what I'm hearing when I'm hearing, oh, we need 3 million more security people. Yes, there are 3 million cybersecurity vacancies. Okay. To do what? Okay. And when are we going to start replicating the problems of the past? And when are we going to start looking at how we could be more efficient? And that's going to take us onto the topic of AI, I think. Because I think this is exactly where AI and generative AI has a role to play, undoubtedly.
Yeah. And I think, JC, you're spot on. That's exactly what I was thinking, because I think in lots of whether we call them technical or not areas, there is these figures at the moment that we're missing, so many million of a certain skill set. But actually, a lot of companies are reflecting at the moment about whether their human skills or their machine skills that we need, and I think that's very true in the cyberspace, especially if the issues are sort of efficiency, productivity things, which I think they are, is actually probably AI agents are a lot quicker and in some cases a lot better at doing some of these things. Now, the problem is AI becomes the defender, but also the offender, because obviously people are then building AI to circumvent AI, and there's a really interesting, I suppose, future that's in front of us.
But that's the long and short for me around AI in cyber. I must admit, of course, I mean, I don't need to tell you that there is this is the dominant topic out there, and everybody's talking about it. It's very, very hard to find content that is not AI related or generative AI related even. Now, for me, it's to be honest, you may see it on my face. I failed to be really excited by it. I think AI in cybersecurity, to start with, is not a new topic. It's not a new topic. It's been around for at least. It's been talked about seriously for at least 5 to 6 years. I co-animate the alumni, the cybersecurity alumni group of Telecom Paris, which is the university where I graduated from. And we did there is the Alumni Association publishes a magazine a number of times a year, and we did a series of articles on the topic in 2018, AI and cybersecurity. And already the problem was being framed exactly as you framed it. Where is the needle going to end up? It's going to help the attackers, it's going to help the defenders. The needle will end up somewhere. Generative AI is accelerating that. There is absolutely no doubt it's making attackers more efficient. It is starting to help, and it will help defenders more. We need to wait and see where the needle ends up. I don't think, I could be wrong here, and I'm not, but I doubt it will have disruptive effects similar to what we may see in other sectors.
Interesting. I mean, you did mention in the book about the video call where actually the person really wasn't on the call and the transfer of money happened. I know Warren Buffett came out there recently and said, scamming is going to be the new industry, because someone had sent him a deep fake of himself, which he said was so impressive it could have fooled his whole family.
Yeah, those things are typical of what we're going to see now, and more of it. But I think people will get used to it. People will adjust. and defenders will adjust as well. At the end of the day, those scams have been around in some shape or another for a long time. You know, people were falling for Nigerian scams, email Nigerian scams 20 years ago, Tony. Okay? And they were silly emails, offering you tens of millions because somebody had died. I mean, you know what I mean? There were entire factories of people in Nigeria running those scams. People were falling for them. Okay? It used to work. That's why all those guys were working on it. So I think this is going to continue to happen. Let's not forget one thing about cyber threats also, is that generative AI is not deconstructing the makeup of cyber threats. Okay, in other words, the cyber threats are still architected at a high level around the same concept. There is a threat agent with motivations, with targets, with attack mechanism, focusing on attack surfaces and so on. Those things remain. Okay, those concepts remain. Yes, fine, the mechanism may be more effective, more efficient, more difficult to detect, but fundamentally the threat agents are still the same. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't think generative AI is introducing new threat agents. It's making the existing one more efficient, yes, and ultimately also make the defenders more efficient. But that's the way I'm seeing it. I'm sorry, I'm not massively excited by it, and also probably because I'm not massively excited by the tech industry at large, and I get the sense that quite a lot of what I'm hearing about generative AI now, I heard it about the blockchain not so long ago.
Yeah,
I'm a bit sarcastic here, but what I'm trying to say is that Gen AI is going to change the world. We've heard it with the blockchain. Did it happen? Maybe not. I don't know. I'm just a bit sarcastic about the tech industry. That's all.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot not to like in what we're seeing in terms of deep fakes, etc. But I think it's the level of knowledge you now need and the level of protection you now need not to fall to some of these mechanisms has gone to another level, in my opinion. I think, yeah, we did have those emails maybe 5-10 years ago. We were able to educate people, about watching out for those, but I think it's very difficult now to decipher whether something is legitimate or not. But it brings me to another point, JC, and I was intrigued when I was reading the book about it, because I think things are getting incredibly, I suppose, difficult to detect what is and isn't an attack, or what is and isn't fake. But you also advocate or at least mention the possibility of non-technical CISOs, people that aren't really from a technical background. And I found that interesting, because I think it's interesting because it also might help bridge that gap, that we people now that are ready to go and operate at a board level, because they talk the language of the business. But also I'd be slightly worried that it is at its core quite a technical space, in that you're purchasing technical solutions, etc. And again, vendors nearly smell when someone isn't technical, and they can, I suppose, take advantage of the lack of technical knowledge in certain roles. So I don't know how you see that playing out, this idea of a non-technical CISO.
I think it's about splitting the role, and that's a little bit what we said earlier. I think we must not ignore the technical dimension of the role. So a non-technical CISO, yes, but not without some form of technical CISO next to it or underneath it. Okay, so it's about splitting the roles, splitting the function, reorganizing the cybersecurity practice in a way where you can have a business-facing part and a technical-facing part. It's not about expecting a non-technical person to handle the technical part of the role. I think it's got to be seen in the context of an organization large enough to support that type of setup. But in my mind, it's about splitting the role, not really expecting a non-technical person to handle the technical aspects. I totally agree with what you're saying. This would be it would be very bad on its own, just to create a sort of business-facing cyber practice without any kind of technical component in it, or leaving the technical components spread across the IT team. I think that could be very inefficient. to be honest, very inefficient. It's got to be a balance. It's got to be a balance. But many organizations, when maturity is low and you need to drive, a genuine change program, you need to be visible and audible and credible high enough in the organization for that message to be heard across all silos. And that's the idea, effectively, of pushing part of the role up while retaining the technical part somewhere in the organization where it will work. And I must insist, the reporting line of the CISO in that respect, the reporting line of the technical CISO, for me, is an irrelevance. It's an irrelevance. I'm not dogmatic about it. There are many people who say, cannot report the CIO because of conflict of interest and this and that. I don't buy into that. I think if your CIO doesn't understand that cyber is critical, then frankly, you've got a problem far bigger than the reporting line of your technical CISO. So to me, we are. This is also the debate for the last decade. Okay, you shouldn't be too worried having a technical CISO reporting the CIO. If your CIO doesn't get cyber, then you're in trouble, regardless. Okay, and if your CIO doesn't prioritize in favor of cyber, then you're in trouble. I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm not saying all organizations are well managed, by the way. Far from it. Okay.
You see, I'm conscious of time, but I want to ask you about people, because all the reports come out, invariably point at, well, actually, it's not about the technology going wrong, it's about the people doing things they shouldn't do. So, there was a firm I used to be involved in, used about the cultural firewall. So have we improved culturally in terms of, are people buying into and understanding cyber, or is there still a gap? And if there is a gap, what do we need to do to close it?
You cannot separate security from the security culture from the culture of the firm. Okay? That's a big mistake. Pretending that you're going to train people, pretending that this is just about awareness, this is just about telling people what to do. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes of the last 20 years. Okay? And it's all part of that sort of bottom-up approach we've been talking about, which in my opinion has failed. This is not about telling people what to do. Okay, and so what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that you have to embed security within the culture of the firm. It has to be seen as being part of the DNA of the firm. Okay, and that's a journey that starts at the top. Okay, if you've got executives at the top always, being allowed to bypass the rules, how do you expect people everywhere else in the organization to follow the same rules? Okay, you have got to understand that. You've got to understand that this is about the guys at the top living the values and embodying the values and talking about those values all the time. It's a cultural thing. Ultimately, you protect what you care about. Okay, and that's the sort of dynamics you want to create. If you take it the other way around, in an organization which is toxic, in an organization where nothing works, in an organization where nobody trusts the boss, in an organization where management is toxic, you can spend as much money as you like on security awareness. That's the harsh and sarcastic way to put it. Okay.
Yeah, we called the sheep tip. We set them on a training program.
I've seen organizations where people were competing on how quickly they could do the compliance program. Okay. It was a speed contest. Oh, come on. I mean, I'm just joking here, but fundamentally, this is what we need to try to build. Okay, this is not about telling people what to do. This is about inspiring them to do it. It's about creating the context where they're going to care about the organization and therefore they're going to want to protect it. I don't think people need to be told. If people need to be told, you have to ask yourself about what the security awareness people have been doing for the past 20 years, because large organizations have been spending millions and millions on security awareness programs. Those people generally move from one organization to another. They get one awareness course, another one. It's all the same stuff. Okay, people by now should know what needs to be done. They should know that what is a strong password. They should know that you don't write it down. They should know all those things. I'm simplifying a little bit here, but people cannot pretend they have not been exposed to those messages.
Sure, yeah. And JC, what and this is a little anecdote and a very short one because I know we're nearly up in time, but I know I'm very aware of a very large financial organization. Again, had invested, like you were talking about, a lot in cyber, in security, data privacy, all those things. Had trained staff what to look out for in terms of emails, passwords, all that stuff. But they had an audit, an external security firm audited them. And the firm came in to present back in to the board, and the equivalent of the chief security officer was there. And next thing, the chief security officer was quite smug because they'd been watching all the logs, and there was no evidence of any penetration of any system. But next thing, the very first thing the external auditor said was he failed. And the security officer was saying, well, how could we have failed? I've looked at all the files. There's no end. He says, on such and such a date, so he gave the date, one of my auditors met someone at the front door of your building, started talking to them, followed them in the front door, went downstairs because the IT infrastructure is invariably downstairs. And that day they were servicing the cooling system. So the door to a whole set of servers was open, and he said, "I fail." And I thought it was really interesting. This idea of social engineering is so powerful, and sometimes we don't have to go through all those layers of security of software that's set up to prevent us. That sometimes the very easy solutions are just walk into a building or talking to someone.
Yeah, but you've got to go back to the threats. You've got to go back to the threats you're facing. And are those type of threats genuinely targeting you? Because, if you are, not all the threats target all organizations all the time. You have to look back at the nature of your business, what you do, the threats that are likely to target you, and so on. Social engineering may be a threat in some industries. It may not be in others. And I think this is a problem I see quite often. People following a one-size-fits-all type of approach to the protection program they want to put in place. But fundamentally, very rarely we see a linkage between the threats, the protective measures, the level of risk the business carries. Fundamentally, those things are linked. You need to understand the threats you're facing. You protect yourselves by implementing a number of protective measures to defend against those threats. Those protective measures come from good practice. They come from regulatory requirements and so on. And then by figuring out what is it that you do and don't do, by figuring out what the gaps are in your protective model, you understand the level of risk you carry, and that is effectively what gets fed back into your risk management program and so on. That's the sort of linked up logic, linked up model that I see far too rarely, to be honest.
And I think, JC, also, I don't think organizations have necessarily updated those threat scenarios, especially threat scenarios that are sort of take into account, like Tony was saying earlier, the latest technologies, the AI, the deep fakes, etc. At least when I look at I suppose the scenarios that are being considered, they're like something from 10 years ago.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you have the assessment of the threats facing you, and then the technical scenarios those threats could use to attack you, and that's what's rarely updated. The threats evolve, but not that often. But the threat scenarios do evolve, and that's what needs to be kept updated. But fundamentally, being realistic about the threats you're facing is key. Not everybody is under attack from state-backed actors, okay? For example, but it's probably worth to have it somewhere on your radar. But if you are a 500 staff meatpacking business, should you be worried about China? Probably not. If you have a 500 staff, small business manufacturing, I don't know, some critical part in the wing of Airbus, you're a subcontractor of Airbus, you're manufacturing some critical part, in their wing, some critical sensor that goes in the wing, should you be worried about China? Yeah, I guess you should. I think you should. So it's all about understanding the sort of the threats you're facing and being realistic about it and protecting yourself accordingly.
So last word, JC, are you optimistic about CISOs in the future?
I guess you can guess my answer. Not too much. Not too much. I think it's a little bit. It's something we've been hearing in this conversation as well. I think things are not necessarily as they should be. I've got my doubts about the attitude of the top guys towards cyber. We've heard it in the podcast. I think the spiral of failure can only be broken top down. I don't think bottom up has worked. That's essentially the message in the book. But that the top down realization, I think, is still in the process of happening. And until it happens, I doubt things will change a lot, to be honest. So, but it will change when we start to see different dynamics at the top.
And I'd also suggest, JC, people need to start reading books, and I would really recommend people read the book, as you can see here over my shoulder, your most recent book, because I think it is a very, very interesting read, and it is provocative as well. And I think the conversation today hopefully gives a sense of, that the nature of that provocative discussion that we need to be having about this discipline. Tony, I'm going to leave you to have the final word on this.
Well, look, firstly to thank JC, always a pleasure, JC, and everyone should follow JC. You'll find him on LinkedIn, but he's a prolific writer. So I want to thank JC. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank the Digital Transformation Lab, and I want to thank Cork University Business School for all their support. So JC, thank you. It's been a blast.
Thanks, JC.
Thank you, guys. It's been a very real pleasure to be with you.